Alright, so I decided just to, let's just put this damn thing together, shall we? Alright, so the parts that I noticed, this is going to be for the, this is for the fronts. So looking over the manual, they actually do have a very good manual here. So piecing it together, obviously we have the shock. This all came together along with the adjustment bolt, the settings bolt. So just take that off, because that's going to go on last. The other pieces that you're going to need is obviously the boot spring. I'm not using these springs in the final install. I'm just trying to get an idea of how to put pieces all together. I'd rather figure it out now instead of later. So you have your spring, you have your top hat. Some of the pieces that they actually show in the drawings is actually already in the top hat, and it'll actually be noted there also. Next thing that you're going to need is this one little spacer, which they call spacer number 2. This is basically like a little guide washer, and then you have your locking M12. Now you'll notice that these two are in a bag by themselves, but this M12 is actually in the bag with the rear accessories. So all the bolts and stuff for the rear suspension, that M12 is actually there. And the difference between the M12 and the M10, which is in this hand, is smaller and actually has the nylon locking threads on the inside. And then the M12 does not have nylon, and obviously it is bigger in size. So this guy, in order to use it, you're going to need, again, this is just an example, but what I found out that is needed is a 17 inch, or 17 millimeter, not 17 inch, that would be ridiculous, but 17 millimeter socket in order to tighten this guy up when we get there. So first things first on here, I actually just unlocked the bottom portion here, so that way I can actually freely spin the bottom perch. Then I'm just going to go ahead and put on the boot. The way that the boot goes, the tapered end here is going to be at the top, and this guy is actually going to slide around the sleeve here on the shock. So get that guy on, press it down a little bit, you'll see it actually kind of go on like a little condom. So once that guy's on there, we're going to go ahead and put on our spring. So we got our spring on there. Then you're going to go ahead and put what they refer to as the spacer number 2. Again, this was in the small baggie with this guide washer here. Okay, so we're going to put that guy on. And then we're going to go ahead and put the top on. Obviously the top is going to have the screws pointing upward. Put that guy on. I'm just going to turn it here so I can work on it better. And then once that guy is on, you're going to go ahead and put the guide, that guide washer in. That's going to slide in and actually allows the top hat to not swivel as much. Now from here, go ahead and tighten up your locking nut, the M12. As soon as you try, you'll notice that you'll get a few threads and then it will lock. So that's where you actually need to get your 17 and then actually start screwing it on there. So I'm not going to completely tighten everything, of course, but once you get it on there, so that way it's actually making contact with the guide nut, what you're going to then do is just tighten up the bottom perch, and it is righty-tighty, and then that's actually going to raise everything, and then you're going to raise it to the base of the top hat. And as per Ohlins, you're going to raise it when it touches, you're going to raise it 2 millimeters so that way it has some preload. Once that is tightened, now you tighten up this bottom locking nut onto your bottom perch. And once you do that, this portion is set. You're not doing anything else to this guy. That's the beauty of this design, is because now any adjustment that you need as far as going in to lower the car or raising the car, you're just going to loosen this one up. Loosen this up, keep loosening it up. and then you're going to be able to turn the body of the shock, so that way this guy is essentially turning, and then this is going to raise or lower your car, and your preload is always going to be set with that particular spring that you have. Be mindful that you have to have the right spring. If you decide, hey, I'm going to go ahead and get another aftermarket spring, keep in mind that these springs, yes, I do measure from the one, these springs, and it's not loaded right now, is 7 and 7/8. So keep that in mind, because what is happening is that if I go any shorter, I'm not going to be able to preload it here because there's not that much thread. If I take this whole thing off real quick, I'll actually tell you what the measurement is. And remember, when you're tightening this up, read the manual. It actually tells you to tighten it. I believe it was 50 Newton meters or something like that. So just make sure that you look at the manual. Just don't over tighten it when you do that. So I'll figure out how to get that guy off. But in the meantime, the amount of threads that I can tell is no more than 1 1/8 from the base of the perch, approximately, when it's preloaded. So yeah, again, your measurement of this particular spring is 7 inches and 7/8. So do not go any smaller than that. You can go larger, but do not go any smaller than that. Alright, so we'll do the rears later, and then basically just do this kind of assembly. But lastly, once this is on, you're going to just put on your adjustment. Once everything's nice and tight, tighten this guy in, and then you're good to go. Alright, that's the fronts. Alright guys, so what I just did here, I'm actually going to measure from the Claffey's car. I measured from this bottom of the top hat, which is this rubber gasket, to the center hole where the bolt was, so the center of that particular bolt. So when this is tightened up all the way, I just want to see what the distance is. And then this portion, this is all assembled with the exception of the locking nut, so that way it's never going to move. I'm not worried about the spring preload, because that's not going to change the actual height from the top hat to the base. So I know a lot of people are worried about whatever the hell is going on in here. I actually don't really care, because that can always be adjusted. You're really just worried about from the bottom to the top hat. So from the top hat on down, I measured on his car, it was 18 and 5/8, which, looking at this, he was almost at the minimum as far as where this is locking in. So I don't want this locked in, so I'm just going to loosen this guy up, and I'm going to go to a distance of 19 inches for my baseline, and then I'll see how it fares on the car first, and then I'll adjust from there and just kind of see how everything is. But what I want to do is put it on 19, drive around for a little while with everything nice and even, and then I'll come back on the car and test some things out. So yeah, gonna try that out for right now. Alright, for those wondering what the stock setup was, put this here. Alright, so with this in place right here, the OEM is 20 inches. So 20 inches from the factory, from the top hat to the center of the hole is approximately 20 inches. So if we set this guy up, alright, so stock is 20 3/8. So 20 3/8 is the distance from the top hat's rubber base to the center hole. Alright, last video of the night. Alright, so right now I have the rear apart so you can actually get a chance to see it. So this is a fully assembled rear. You're going to need both spindles in order to break these off. So I used one for this and then braced the other side with that, and just kind of did a cross in order to break them loose, and I just repeated that here and here to get that loose, and then this one comes off a little bit easier. I decided to just go ahead and separate everything real quick just to kind of see how it is. There's already markings on the shock from where the OEM was, and then this is actually where this guy is, and I can always just measure it to double check anyway. So that was actually pretty cool. So obviously you can see that this body itself is around 4.5 inches. The depth in here, this is actually a nice solid metal and or steel, and that depth is 3 and almost 3/8. Not that you're really going to get in there anyway. The amount of thread on there, let's measure it precisely, is so 2.5 from the entire thread body. In here, you'll barely be able to see it, but you can see like right here is actually not threaded. So the part that from the top side that is threaded is about 1 inch and 3/8, and then on the bottom side, the part that is threaded is 2 and 3/8. So that's how much flexibility you have at the top and bottom respectively in here with the threads. So obviously this guy, put it on here, thread it on, and then the springs that I'm using are the 10 springs. So with this guy, I don't have the top hats because they're currently on the car. So when I assemble this, I'm going to try and figure out, you know, where that top hat is actually sitting, and then go by some rough measurements based off of the Claffeys. But apparently he did not adjust on the front or on the rear, know that this actually had a double type setup. So you know, the preload is set up totally separate than the height adjustability. He did not know that. It was just his first time installing it, so he wasn't aware. So the measurements that I actually got off of him are going to be totally wrong. So I'm going to actually go higher when I'm building it. But just for shits and giggles, I felt like taking stuff apart and seeing how to put it back together. That's how I learn. All right. Hopefully this helps some people out. Oh, the amount of thread on the body here. There seems to be a safe marking here. So from the safe marking, it's 4 3/4. So 4 3/4 threading up top. From base to safe marking, it is approximately 1.5 inches. Okay, there you go.